A mafia boss's beloved sister was dying in childbirth. 15 world-class doctors had tried everything for 38 hours. Nothing worked. The baby was stuck, and time was running out. Roman Castellano, the man who made all of New York tremble, stood helpless for the first time in his life. Then a 27-year-old cleaning lady, still holding her mop, did something that made every doctor in that room freeze. She knocked on the delivery room door and said 5 words that should have gotten her killed. "I can save your sister." She had no medical degree, no license, just hands that had delivered babies in a village most Americans couldn't find on a map. For 5 years, Catalina Reyes had mopped these floors in silence, but her grandmother had taught her secrets that Harvard Medical School never learned. Techniques passed down through 7 generations that could turn a baby without surgery. Roman nearly had his men drag her out. His sister was minutes from emergency surgery that could kill her. Get her out of here, now. Why would anyone trust a cleaning lady over 15 Ivy League doctors? This is unacceptable. Wait, give her a chance. What? Why? But Gianna Castellano looked into Catalina's eyes and saw something the expensive specialists didn't have. Certainty. Let her try, Gianna whispered to her brother. Roman, trust me. Catalina had 5 minutes. If she failed, she wouldn't just lose her job. She'd face the wrath of the most dangerous man in New York. If she succeeded, she'd prove that the woman everyone ignored knew more than the experts everyone trusted. She placed her calloused, cleaning, chemical-worn hands on the mafia boss's sister's belly, and what happened in the next 10 minutes would either make her a hero or destroy her completely. If you're already hooked by Catalina's story, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Catalina stepped through the door of the delivery room and felt the suffocating contrast at once. The room was as spacious as a 5-star hotel suite, with soft light falling from custom-designed fixtures and marble floors polished so brightly she could see her own reflection staring back. Medical equipment worth millions of dollars lined the walls, monitor screens flickering with red numbers and alarms. The newest ultrasound machine, a birthing bed that could be adjusted to any angle. All the most advanced technology money could buy. And then there were her hands. Calloused, cracked, worn down by cleaning chemicals after 5 years of scrubbing floors. 15 doctors stood around the bed like a fortress made of white coats, their eyes fixed on Catalina, and she could read everything inside those looks. Contempt, doubt, outrage. A few folded their arms across their chests, lips pressed tight. Another shook his head slowly, as if he were watching a farce unfold. Dr. Morrison, the gray-haired man with a Yale diploma hanging in his office, didn't even bother to hide the disgust on his face. Roman stood in the corner with 4 bodyguards, his gaze never leaving Catalina for a single second. Every step she took, he watched. Every movement of her hands, he recorded. She knew that if she did anything suspicious, those men wouldn't hesitate to act. But Catalina didn't look at them. She only looked at Gianna. The woman on the bed looked like a ghost of herself. 38 hours of labor had drained every last ounce of strength from her. Her eyes were hollow, her lips split and dry, her black hair plastered to her sweat-soaked forehead. But when Catalina drew close, Gianna opened her eyes and looked at her. In those exhausted eyes, Catalina saw something that made her heart tighten. Hope. Hope as fragile as a thread, but still there. Catalina stopped beside the bed, lowering her voice to something gentle. I'm going to place my hands on your belly now. I won't hurt you. Gianna nodded, too tired to form words. Catalina drew in a deep breath, then laid her weathered hands on the stranger's abdomen, and the world around her disappeared. It was the feeling her grandmother had called the knowing, a connection science couldn't explain, couldn't be learned from books, only passed from one pair of hands to another through generations. Information began to travel through skin, through muscle, through bone. Catalina closed her eyes and listened with her fingers. She could feel the baby. The head was down, and that was good, but the rotation was completely wrong. The baby's face was turned upward instead of downward, the back pressed against the mother's spine, a shoulder trapped at the pelvis at an angle that couldn't possibly pass through. The doctors had been right to say the baby was stuck, but they were wrong to think surgery was the only way. And then Catalina felt something else, something no machine could measure. The baby wasn't panicking. The heart rate was dropping not because the baby was dying. The baby was resting, waiting for someone to understand, waiting for someone to help find a way out. Children know more than you think, her grandmother had once told her. They know when someone truly understands them. A memory crashed into her without warning. 5 years ago, another night, another room. Her belly had been round like this too. Her son had once lain inside her like this too. Matteo. She had planned to name him Matteo. Familiar pain rose like a wave, but Catalina forced it down. Not now. Not here. This baby still had a chance, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Catalina opened her eyes. Her voice carried through the silent room, clear and steady. I know what the problem is, and I know how to fix it. Roman took one step forward, his gaze burning into her. Then do it. Right now. Catalina began to move her hands. Slowly, with intention. Each finger glided across Gianna's belly, as if she were reading a book, written in a language only she could understand. She searched for the baby's shoulder first, feeling the small curve hidden beneath the taut skin. Then she began to press. Not forcing, not shoving, only suggesting, guiding, as if she were whispering to the baby with her hands instead of with words. Vamos, pequeño, she murmured in Spanish, the language of home, of her grandmother, of 7 generations of women who had delivered babies before her. Just a little turn. Show me you can move. Dr. Morrison couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped forward, his voice thick with contempt. This is a farce. She's just touching the patient's stomach. Doctor. Chen, the man with a Harvard diploma hanging in his office, nodded in agreement. We should stop this immediately. Every second that passes is another second of danger for both mother and child. But Dr. Wells said nothing. She stood still, her eyes never leaving Catalina's hands. She'd been an obstetrician for 25 years, had delivered thousands of babies, had read every obstetrics textbook ever written, and she was seeing something familiar in the way those hands moved. Wait, she thought, brows drawing together. That's Leopold's maneuver, but altered, refined. Where did she learn this? Leopold's maneuver was a basic technique every obstetrician was taught, used to determine fetal position through the abdominal wall. But the way Catalina performed it didn't resemble anything Dr. Wells had ever seen in a book. It was smoother, more natural, as if this technique had been passed from one pair of hands to another through generations, honed and perfected by lived experience rather than by theory. This cleaning woman knew something. Dr. Wells was certain of it. Suddenly, Gianna moaned, her body arched, her face tightening with pain. A contraction was coming. 2 doctors moved in at once, ready to intervene. One reached toward Gianna's abdomen, the other prepared to call a nurse, but Catalina's voice cut through, sharp and final. No, don't touch her. The whole room went rigid. A cleaning woman had just given an order to Ivy League doctors. Doctor. Morrison opened his mouth to protest, but Catalina didn't give him the chance. Let the contraction do its work, she said, her tone strangely steady in the charged air of the room. Her body knows what to do. We only need to guide, not force. She kept her hands on Gianna's belly, but changed the pressure. Instead of fighting the contraction, she worked with it. When the uterus tightened, she adjusted the angle. When the pain rose to its peak, she increased pressure in exactly the right place, like a dancer moving to music only she could hear. Gianna panted, fingernails raking the bedsheet. Michael gripped his wife's hand, his face drained of color. 30 seconds passed like 30 years. Then the contraction ended. Gianna let out a shaky breath, her body collapsing back onto the bed. Catalina kept her hands where they were, eyes squeezed shut, completely focused. The room was so quiet that the steady beep of the monitor could be heard. And then the nurse beside the screen spoke, her voice full of disbelief. The baby moved. Every gaze snapped to the ultrasound screen. The nurse swallowed, checked again before continuing. Just a little, but it moved. Silence. No one dared to breathe too hard. Dr. Morrison opened his mouth and then closed it, not knowing what to say. Dr. Chen stared at the screen as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. And Dr. Wells, the woman who'd been skeptical from the start but also the only one who'd truly watched, stepped forward. Her voice rang out, decisive and clear. Keep going. Don't stop. Roman glanced at his watch. 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes that felt like 3 years. His face was drawn tight as a wire. His jaw clenched so hard the grinding of his teeth could almost be heard. His hand curled into a fist, knuckles blanched white from the force of his grip. 4 bodyguards stood behind him like 4 stone statues, their eyes never leaving Catalina, ready to move the instant he gave the order. They'd been with Roman long enough to know that when their boss stayed silent for too long, it was usually the warning sign of a storm about to break. Michael knelt beside his wife's bed, both hands locked around Gianna's as if the moment he let go she might disappear. His lips moved with soundless prayers, his eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness and fear. 38 hours ago, he'd been a successful lawyer with a perfect life. Now he was only a desperate husband, begging for a miracle from a cleaning woman whose name he'd never even known. Catalina kept working, her hands moving slowly but surely. She could feel the baby responding, little by little, like a flower opening under sunlight. Just a little more time, just a little more. And then the sharp beep, beep, beep tore through the air. The monitor began to scream, a piercing sound filling the room like a death bell. Every head snapped toward the screen. The nearest nurse shouted, her voice trembling with panic. The fetal heart rate is dropping. 120, 110, 100. The delivery room exploded into chaos. Nurses ran for the medication cabinet. Doctors barked overlapping orders. Machines shrieked. Someone was calling the operating room. Doctor. Morrison charged forward, his face flushed red with anger and fear. This is enough. We need surgery right now. He swung toward Roman, his voice nearly pleading. Mr. Castellano, your sister will die if we don't act immediately. Roman didn't need to hear more. He'd waited too long, wagered too much on an unknown cleaning woman, and now his sister was dying. His voice rang out cold as ice, each word as sharp as a blade. It's over. Get her out of my sight. 2 bodyguards moved at once toward Catalina, their large hands ready to seize her and drag her away. But Catalina didn't look up. She didn't react to the alarms, didn't react to the chaos around her, didn't react to the 2 men closing in. Her hands stayed exactly where they were on Gianna's belly, steady as stone. Then she spoke, her voice so calm it sounded almost cold inside the storm raging all around them. No, the baby's resting, not dying. There's a difference. The entire room froze. The bodyguard stopped a few steps from her, looking to Roman for orders. The doctors fell silent, unable to believe what they'd heard. A cleaning woman had just defied a mafia boss. She'd just signed her own death warrant. Catalina lifted her head, and for the first time since she walked into this room, she looked Roman Castellano straight in the eyes. No fear, no trembling, only absolute certainty. Give me 30 seconds. Roman stepped forward, danger pouring off him like a predator about to strike. 30 seconds? My sister could die in 30 seconds. Your sister will die on the operating table. Catalina didn't blink. I've seen this before. The baby's too low. Surgery will kill them both. But if you let me finish, she continued, her voice steady as steel, they'll both live. I'm betting my life on that. Silence. The monitor still screamed. 95, 90, 85. The red numbers flashed like a countdown to disaster. Roman stood in the middle of the room, and for the first time in his 36 years, he didn't know what to do. He was Roman Castellano. He'd built an empire from nothing. He'd made the most powerful enemies kneel. He'd never been helpless. Not once. Until tonight. A weak whisper cut through his thoughts. Roman. Gianna. His sister was looking at him with eyes exhausted to the bone, yet still filled with trust. Please. One word. Just one word. But it was enough to bring down every wall Roman had ever built. He looked at his sister, the woman he'd sworn to protect at any cost since the day their mother died, the only person in the world who could make him do anything. Then he looked at Catalina, the cleaning woman with hands that knew the truth of hard work and eyes that didn't know fear, the woman who dared face him when all of New York shook at his name. 30 seconds. He was gambling his sister's life on 30 seconds. 30 seconds. His voice came out rough. Not 1 second more. Catalina nodded once and turned back to her work. Her hands moved faster now, more certain, as if she'd known all along he would agree. The screen still flashed red. 85, 80, 75. The entire room held its breath, and the clock began to count down. 30 seconds. That was all Catalina had. 30 seconds to prove she wasn't crazy. 30 seconds to save 2 lives. 30 seconds before Roman Castellano gave the order to end everything. The room sank into a heavy silence that felt hard to breathe through. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe too loud. The monitor kept blaring its steady alarm, red numbers flashing as if they were counting down toward disaster. 75, 70, 65. Catalina closed her eyes. The outside world vanished. The alarms vanished. Roman's furious stare vanished. The doubt of 15 doctors vanished. There was only her and the baby. 2 souls connected through skin and muscle and bone. Her hands moved one final time. The exact pressure, the exact place, the exact angle. 7 generations of knowledge flowed through her strong, experienced fingers, guiding her millimeter by millimeter. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her voice light as breath. "Your mama is waiting. Your family is waiting. Just turn for me. Just a little turn." And then she felt it. Beneath her palms, a small movement. Not something she created, not something the contraction created. The baby was turning on its own. Little by little, like a slow dance in the dark. The shoulder turned first, sliding through the narrow place where it had been trapped for nearly 2 days. Then the head tilted, searching for a new angle. The chin tucked to the chest, the posture every baby needs to be born. Catalina wanted to cry. She wanted to shout with joy, but she didn't do any of that. She only kept her hands steady, kept guiding, kept whispering encouragement until the baby finished its dance. Perfect position. The monitor was the first thing to reflect the miracle. The red numbers began to change. 90, 100, 115, 130, 145. The alarm cut off. Silence dropped so suddenly that everyone flinched, as if they'd been jolted awake from a nightmare. The nurse by the screen cried out, her voice shaking because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "The heart rate is stabilizing. 145 and holding." Catalina opened her eyes. She drew her hands back slowly and let them fall to her sides. Hands roughened by cleaning chemicals. Hands the 15 Ivy League doctors had dismissed, now trembling faintly with exhaustion. But her voice was still steel when she spoke. "It's done. The baby's in the right position. Doctor." Wells didn't wait a single second. She rushed to the bed, gloved hands checking quickly. Every gaze locked on her, waiting for the final verdict. Then Doctor. Wells looked up, her eyes so wide they nearly bulged. "Oh my God." Her voice was a whisper, as if anything louder might shatter the miracle. "She's right. Occiput anterior. Perfect position." She turned to Catalina, and for the first time in her 25 years as a doctor, she couldn't find words. "How? How did you do that?" Catalina didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer lived in 7 generations of women who'd delivered babies before her, in her grandmother's hands that had taught her when she was still a child, in the hundreds of babies she'd welcomed into the world in a small village most Americans couldn't find on a map. 15 Ivy League doctors stood frozen like stone statues. They'd spent their lives studying at the most prestigious universities in the world. They'd read thousands of books, attended hundreds of conferences, performed thousands of surgeries, and they'd just watched a cleaning woman do what all of them together couldn't do in 38 hours. Dr. Morrison, the one who'd fought it hardest, the one who'd called Catalina a farce, stood there with his mouth hanging open. That can't be. Doctor." Wells turned on him, her voice cold as ice. "Clearly it can." Roman stood in the corner, and for the first time in his 36 years, he didn't know how to react. He'd built an empire with ruthlessness and power. He'd made the most formidable enemies kneel through fear. He'd thought he'd seen everything, known everything, controlled everything. But he'd never seen anyone like Catalina Reyes. He looked at her, that small cleaning woman with eyes older than her years, and felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Respect, pure and absolute. She'd faced him when all of New York trembled. She'd gambled her life to save his sister, and she'd won. Suddenly, Gianna groaned. Her body arched, stronger than any time before. Another contraction crashed in, and this time, everything was different. Doctor. Wells moved into position at once, her eyes bright with hope. "She's ready. The baby's coming. Everyone, positions now." The contraction hit like a tsunami, stronger than all the ones before, more intense than all the ones before. Gianna arched, and something strange happened. After 38 hours of exhaustion, after hours of agonizing struggle, suddenly everything changed. She knew exactly what to do. A primal instinct woke up, the instinct etched into the DNA of every woman since the beginning of time. Her body didn't resist the pain anymore. It welcomed the pain. It used the pain. Dr. Wells shouted, her voice carrying across the room. "Push, Gianna. Push right now." Gianna screamed. Not the scream of pain or despair from the last 38 hours. This was a scream of power, a scream of determination, a scream of a mother ready to do anything to bring her child into the world. She pushed with everything she had left in her exhausted body. And for the first time in this long nightmare, the baby moved the right way. Michael knelt beside the bed, gripping his wife's hand. tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're doing it, baby. You're doing it." His voice broke, shattered with emotion. Another contraction, another scream, another push. Gianna squeezed her husband's hand so hard her nails bit into his skin. But Michael didn't even flinch. He only looked at her with something like worship, as if she were the strongest creature he'd ever seen. "Doctor." Wells leaned in, her eyes blazing. "I can see the head. Just one more push." Gianna took a deep breath. This was the moment that decided everything. After this grueling ordeal, after 15 doctors had been powerless, after a cleaning woman had walked in and done the impossible, it had all led to this. She screamed one last time. The sound tore through the air, echoing across the luxurious room. She pushed with every shred of strength she had left, with all the love of a mother, with all the will of a woman who'd fought for 38 hours just to hold her child. And then the cry rang out. A small sound, but fierce enough to rip apart 38 hours of tension and fear and despair. The cry of life, the cry of a miracle, the cry of a new soul entering this world. "It's a boy! A healthy baby boy!" Dr. Wells shouted, her voice trembling with emotion. The tiny baby, red and slick and wailing, was placed on Gianna's chest. She wrapped him in her arms, tears pouring like a river, lips pressing kisses to the small wet head. She whispered words of love, words she'd waited 38 hours to say. "My love, my son, I love you. I love you so much." Michael dropped to his knees beside his wife and child, shoulders shaking as he cried. He touched his son's tiny hand, and when those little fingers curled around his finger, he broke completely. Not long ago, he'd thought he'd lose them both. Now they were here, safe, together. The room erupted. The doctors, who doubted and looked down on her, were smiling now and clapping. Nurses wiped tears with their sleeves. Laughter and sobs and applause blended into a symphony of joy and relief. But no one noticed Roman Castellano. The mafia boss stood in the corner, motionless as stone. He stared at his nephew, the small life crying on his sister's chest. And the impossible happened. Tears fell down Roman's cheeks. One drop, then too many to count. Roman Castellano, the man who made all of New York afraid, the man who built an empire on blood and fear, the man who hadn't cried since the day his mother died 28 years ago, was crying. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't care who saw. He just stood there, tears streaming down his hard face, looking at his nephew. In that moment, he wasn't a mafia boss anymore. He was only a brother who'd almost lost his sister, an uncle meeting his nephew, a man being reminded that there were things in this world power and money couldn't buy. Catalina stood in the opposite corner, where no one paid attention. She'd slipped back there at some point, making room for the family, making room for the sacred moment she didn't belong to. She quietly wiped her tears with the back of her rough palm. She watched the family come back together, the mother holding her baby, the father crying with happiness, the uncle standing there with tears pouring down his face. This was what she'd lost. 5 years ago, she dreamed of a moment like this too. She'd imagined holding her son, hearing Mateo's first cry, seeing Diego cry with happiness beside her. But fate had stolen everything. Strangely, she didn't hurt. Not right now. She only felt peace, because for the first time in 5 years, she felt like she mattered. She'd saved 2 lives. She'd done what 5 years ago she couldn't do for herself, and that was enough. Roman lifted his head, and his gaze met Catalina's across the crowded room. Between the laughter and the crying and the applause, the two of them looked at each other in silence. Catalina gave a small nod, as if to say, "Don't thank me, don't say anything." But Roman didn't nod back. He only looked at her with an expression she couldn't understand. An expression different from his first anger, different from doubt, different from any way he'd ever looked at anyone. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. "Where is she?" Gianna's voice rang out, weak but urgent. "Where's the woman who saved us?" People looked around, but the corner where Catalina had stood was empty. The cleaning woman was gone, as quietly as she'd appeared. Out in the hallway, Catalina pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator. Her hands were still trembling slightly. Her heart was still racing, but her face was calm, as if nothing had happened. She was only a cleaning woman, invisible, forgotten, and she'd go on like that. Or at least, that's what she thought. 2 hours later, Catalina was mopping the floor on the 3rd-floor corridor. Far from the VIP delivery room, far from the laughter, far from the baby's cries, far from everything that had just happened. She tried to return to normal, like every night, like the last 5 years. Dip the mop into the bucket, wring it out, wipe from left to right, step back once, repeat. A rhythm so familiar she could do it in her sleep. But tonight, her hands were still trembling. Only slightly, almost imperceptibly. But she knew. Her body knew. It hadn't forgotten the feeling of her palms on Gianna's belly, the feeling of the baby turning beneath her hands, the feeling of life moving at her guidance. She'd forgotten that feeling. For 5 years she hadn't delivered a baby. For 5 years she'd hidden who she really was, burying 7 generations of knowledge beneath a janitor's uniform. Tonight, it all came back, and she didn't know what she was supposed to feel about that. Footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. Slow, deliberate. Catalina didn't need to look up to know who was coming. Only one man walked with that kind of confidence, arrogant in its ease, as if the whole world belonged to him, and everyone else was only borrowing space. She kept mopping, didn't pause, didn't look up. The delivery room is on the 7th floor. You're headed the wrong way. Roman Castellano stopped a few steps from her. He stood there alone. No bodyguards, no entourage. Only him and the darkness of the late-night corridor. I'm exactly where I need to be. Catalina still didn't look up. She dipped the mop, wrung it out, kept working as if the most powerful mafia boss in New York was nothing more than an invisible ghost. Who are you? Who are you? Roman asked, and his voice no longer carried the threat it had held in the delivery room. Who are you really? You can read my employee file. Catalina Reyes, janitor, night shift. That's not what I'm asking. Catalina stopped mopping. For the first time since he appeared, she looked up at him. The corridor light fell across her face, sharpening the fatigue, the early lines, the eyes older than her years, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. I used to be a midwife. In El Salvador, a long time ago. Roman didn't speak. He only watched her, waiting. Why are you mopping floors in New York? Catalina bent down and wrung the mop again, even though it didn't need it. Because New York doesn't shoot people for saying no. Silence. That answer hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Roman looked at her differently. No longer the unknown cleaning woman he had nearly thrown out of the delivery room. No longer the woman he'd dismissed. Now he saw someone with a story. Someone with scars. Someone who'd fled something so terrifying that scrubbing floors in a foreign city still felt safer than staying home. Why did you take the risk? He asked, softer now. You knew who I am. You knew what could happen if you failed. Yes. So why? Catalina set the mop down. She straightened, facing the mafia boss, and for the first time he realized how small she was. Small, but not fragile. Because I couldn't save my own child, but I could save your nephew. The words hit Roman like a fist to the chest. He stood there, motionless, as if someone had pulled the air from his lungs. He'd built an empire with violence. He'd heard countless pleas, countless threats, countless lies, but he'd never heard anyone say anything like that. He looked at her, the small woman with eyes older than her years, with calloused hands, with a rumpled janitor uniform, and he saw something he rarely saw in anyone. Real pain. The kind of pain you can't fake, can't perform, can't buy with money. Your child? His voice went rough. That's not a story for tonight. Catalina took hold of the cleaning cart and started pushing it toward the elevator. Go back to your family, Mr. Castellano. They need you. She walked away without looking back. Her footsteps sounded steady on the patterned stone floor she'd just cleaned. Roman stayed where he was, watching her small back recede. He could have called her back. He could have ordered her to stop. He was Roman Castellano. No one refused him. No one turned their back and walked away without his permission. But he did nothing. He only stood there and called after her, his voice carrying down the empty hall. I don't forget a debt. Ever. Catalina stopped at the elevator doors, but she didn't turn around. I don't want anything from you. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. And she was gone. Roman stood alone in the 3rd-floor corridor, staring at the elevator doors after they shut. Around him was silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. He looked down at the spot where she'd been standing. The floor was still wet from the mop. For the first time in his life, someone had refused him, and he hadn't felt anger. For the first time, someone had turned their back and walked away, and he hadn't wanted to punish them. For the first time, someone had made him this curious. Who was she? What had she lost? Why was she here, mopping floors in the middle of the night, carrying secrets that heavy? Roman pulled out his phone and dialed his right hand. The man on the other end answered immediately, even though it was nearly 3 a.m. Find out everything about Catalina Reyes. Roman's voice allowed no argument. Everything. 1 week later, Catalina's world collapsed. She was changing into her uniform in the staff locker room when the HR manager walked in, face as cold as a coin, a stack of paperwork in hand. Miss Reyes, you're suspended from work effective immediately. Catalina stood there with her buttons only half fastened, not understanding what she'd just heard. What's the reason? Practicing medicine without a license. The manager read from the page, voice flat, almost robotic. According to Dr. Morrison's report, on the night of March 12th, you performed medical procedures on a patient without credentials or a professional license. This is a serious violation of New York state law. Catalina wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream that she'd saved 2 lives while 15 credentialed doctors had been helpless. But she didn't do anything. She just stood there, feeling the ground under her feet giving way. You need to leave the hospital immediately. Security will escort you out. And that was it. A week ago, she'd been a silent hero. Now she was a criminal. Instead of praise, she was treated like an offender. Instead of gratitude, she was handed a suspension order. Dr. Morrison, the Yale man she'd humiliated in front of everyone, had reported her. He couldn't stand that a cleaning woman had done what he couldn't, and this was how he got revenge. But that wasn't the worst of it. When Catalina got back to her small apartment in Queens, she found a letter in her mailbox, from immigration. Her heart seemed to stop when she read the cold lines on the page. Her visa was under review. If she was convicted of practicing medicine without a license, she'd be deported. 5 years. 5 years of living in the shadows, working hard, not causing trouble for anyone. 5 years of trying to become invisible so she'd be safe. And one night, one decision, one act of saving someone, had destroyed it all. Her studio was so small she could stand in the middle of the room and touch both opposite walls. The walls were yellowed with damp and mold. The window looked out at the brick wall of the building next door. A twin bed, a small table, a mini fridge, a single-burner gas stove. That was everything she had after 5 years in America. Catalina sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the only photograph on the table. Her grandmother Esperanza. The photo was old, the corners curled, the colors faded, but her smile was still bright as ever. It was the only thing Catalina had brought with her from El Salvador, the only thing left of home. 2 months ago, the last time she'd called, her grandmother's voice had been weaker, her breathing heavier, her coughing spells longer. She was fading. She needed someone to care for her, but Catalina couldn't go back. Don't worry about me, Mija, her grandmother had said, voice trembling through the long-distance line. You've sacrificed enough. You've lost enough. Catalina had cried in silence, making sure her grandmother couldn't hear. Remember, she continued, they'll never understand us. But that doesn't mean we're wrong. Our knowledge is real. Our gift is real. Don't ever forget that. Catalina hadn't dared to visit. If she left the United States, she might never be allowed to return. Her visa was as fragile as a thread, and one small mistake could snap it. And now she might be sent back anyway. Not because she wanted to, not to see her grandmother, but deported like a criminal. A knock at the door made Catalina flinch. Her heart kicked into a wild rhythm. The police? Immigration? Had they come to take her already? So fast? She drew a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Either way, she had nowhere to run, no one to call, nothing to lose but this damp little room. She walked to the door, wrapped her hand around the knob, bracing for the worst. Then she opened it. Roman Castellano stood there, alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, just him in a black suit, standing in the grim hallway of a cheap apartment building like a god who'd wandered into hell. His eyes were hard to read, his face blank. We need to talk. Catalina stood in the doorway and didn't invite him in. She didn't know how she was supposed to react. A week ago, she'd saved his sister. Now he was here, at the door of her miserable apartment, and she didn't know what he wanted. How did you find me? I find everyone I want to find. The answer was simple, as if tracking down the hidden address of an anonymous cleaning woman was the most ordinary thing in the world. And maybe for him it was. Roman looked straight into her eyes, lowering his voice. The question is, do you want my help, or do you want to be deported tomorrow? Catalina stood in the doorway for a few more seconds, hesitating. Every survival instinct in her screamed not to let a mafia boss into her home. But what choice did she have left? She'd lost her job. She was about to be deported. She had nothing left to lose. She stepped back and opened the door wider. Roman walked into her tiny apartment without a word. He looked around, his gaze sliding over the yellowed walls, the window that faced a brick wall, the single bed with sheets faded from too many washes, the one-burner gas stove, the mini fridge humming softly in the corner. Catalina waited for judgment, for contempt, for that look the wealthy usually reserved for people like her. But Roman didn't say anything. He only observed, expressionless, as if he were collecting information instead of passing judgment. He sat down on the only wooden chair in the room, a chair Catalina had salvaged from someone else's trash 3 years ago. She stood across from him, back against the wall, arms folded over her chest like invisible armor. "If you came here to threaten me, save your breath. I've got nothing left to lose." Roman looked at her, his eyes still unreadable, the same eyes she'd met in the delivery room. "If I wanted to threaten you, you'd know." He spoke slowly, voice low and even. "I'm here because you saved my sister's life, and my nephew's. In my world, that kind of debt is never forgotten." Catalina gave a bitter laugh. "I already told you. I don't want your money. I'm not offering money." She fell silent, not sure what to do with that. "If it wasn't money, then what was it?" Roman went on, his tone like he was reading a report. "I'm offering protection. My attorney has been working on your case since yesterday. The charges will be dropped tomorrow morning. Your visa will be secured. Permanently." Catalina stood there, sure she'd misheard. That's impossible. Immigration doesn't move that fast." "It moves that fast," Roman said, "when you know the right people." She stared at him, searching for a joke, a trick, a trap. But she found nothing except absolute seriousness. "Why?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Why would you do this? I'm nobody to you." Roman was quiet for a moment, as if he were weighing every word. Then he spoke, softer than before. "You're not nobody. You're the woman who walked into a room full of people who wanted you gone, and did what none of them could do." He met her eyes. "That's not nobody. That's someone worth protecting." Catalina didn't know what to say. In 5 years of living in this country, no one had ever said words like that to her. No one had looked at her as if she had value. She was only the cleaning woman, invisible, replaceable, unimportant. "But I didn't come only for that," Roman continued. "I came to ask what you want." "What I want? Anything. Consider it repayment for my sister's life." Catalina shook her head. "I don't want repayment. Everyone wants something." The words hung in the air. Catalina wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need anything, didn't want anything, had learned how to live without relying on anyone. But her eyes drifted to the photograph of her grandmother on the table, and every lie froze in her throat. The silence stretched. Roman waited. He didn't rush her, didn't press. He only sat there with a patience she hadn't expected a man like him to have. Finally, Catalina spoke, her voice so small it was almost a whisper. "My grandmother. She's alone in El Salvador. She's sick. I haven't seen her in 5 years." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "I can't go back. If I leave here, I might never be allowed to return." She looked at the photograph, voice shaking. I want to see her again, before it's too late. Done. One word. Just one word." Catalina turned to him. Sure she'd misheard. "You don't understand. Bringing her here, the visa, medical care, everything. I said done." Roman cut her off, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You want your grandmother here. She'll be here. That's all you need to know." And then it happened. The thing Catalina had held back for 5 years. The thing she'd thought she'd forgotten how to do. Tears spilled over. For the first time in 5 years, she cried in front of someone else. Not from sadness, not from fear, but because for the first time, someone was giving her what she truly needed. Not money, not a job, but hope. Hope of seeing the person she loved most before it was too late. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness. But Roman didn't say anything. He didn't comfort her. He didn't touch her. He only sat there, giving her space to cry, as if he understood that sometimes people need permission to fall apart without being judged. Minutes passed, or hours. Catalina didn't know. She only knew that when the tears finally ran dry, when she could lift her head again, Roman was already standing. He walked to the door, but stopped before opening it. "I'll be in touch," he said without turning back. Then he looked over his shoulder. one last look. Catalina, you saved 2 lives. Let someone save you once. The door closed. Catalina stood alone in her tiny apartment, her cheeks still wet with tears, but inside her chest, for the first time in 5 years, something warm was beginning to spark. Hope. 2 weeks later, Catalina stood in front of the tallest building in Manhattan, tilting her head back to stare up at the glass floors that speared the sky until her neck began to ache. Roman Castellano's penthouse sat at the very top, where the rent for a single month was probably equal to everything she'd earned in her whole life. She drew a deep breath and stepped into the lobby. The receptionist looked her up and down, eyes lingering on her worn clothes and the heels of her shoes rubbed thin. But the moment she said her name, the man's attitude shifted completely. She was escorted to a private elevator, the kind that went to only 1 floor. The doors opened, and Catalina walked into a different world. The penthouse stretched out like an ocean of space, ceilings so high she could have built a 2-story apartment inside it. White marble floors gleamed under the lights, reflecting every shine. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the entire Manhattan skyline. The city spread below like a carpet of light. Artwork hung on the walls, the kind Catalina had only ever seen in museums. The furniture was minimalist, but she knew each piece cost more than her whole apartment. She stood there, tense, afraid to touch anything, feeling like a stain in a room built for perfection. Roman appeared from an inner room. No suit, only a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Less frightening at first glance, but still carrying an unmistakable power. He led her to his desk, where a thick stack of documents had been prepared. A visa for her grandmother, comprehensive health insurance, first-class plane tickets, paperwork for a new apartment rental near the hospital. Everything had been handled down to the smallest detail. Catalina signed page after page, her hand trembling faintly, unable to believe any of it was real. When the last page was signed, Roman stood, walked to the liquor cabinet, and poured 2 glasses. He turned back and offered one to her. Stay a little. Catalina meant to refuse. She didn't belong here. She should go back to her tiny apartment, should disappear before he realized she didn't deserve what he was doing for her. But Roman continued, his voice different now, softer, as if the armor he'd worn for years was slowly slipping off. There's something I want to tell you, something I've never told anyone outside my family. Catalina sat down, the glass in her hand, her heart beating fast for reasons she couldn't name. Roman stood by the glass wall, facing the city, his back to her. Silence stretched long enough that she thought he'd changed his mind. Then he began. My mother died giving birth to Gianna, 28 years ago. His tone was steady, like he was reading a news report, but Catalina heard the crack buried deep beneath it. I was 8. I stood outside the delivery room and listened to my mother screaming for hours. Nobody let me in. Nobody told me what was happening. He paused, drew a breath. Then the screaming stopped. The doctor came out, his face white as paper. He told my father. We did everything we could. Roman turned, and Catalina saw something she'd never thought she'd see on the face of a mafia boss. Pain, raw and primitive, as if the wound still bled even after nearly 3 decades. I saw my mother through the glass. She was lying there, blood everywhere, not moving. I didn't understand. I kept thinking she was sleeping. I kept waiting for her to wake up. He took a swallow of whiskey, as if he needed something to push the memory down. That day, I swore I'd never be helpless again. I built an empire. I became the man everyone fears. Because fear is power. He looked at her, his gaze cutting straight through. But when Gianna was on that bed, I was that 8-year-old boy again, standing outside, unable to do anything. All the power, all the money, all the fear I've spread, it meant nothing. His voice shifted, something softer entering it. Then you walked in. A cleaning woman with a mop, and you saved them. He set his glass down and studied her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. You have something I've spent my whole life trying to buy, and I can't. What is it? What do you have that I don't? Catalina was quiet for a moment, staring at the drink in her hand that she hadn't taken a single sip from. I don't have anything special. I know what loss feels like. She lifted her eyes to meet his. When you've lost everything, you're not afraid anymore. Roman watched her, and she knew the next question was coming before he even opened his mouth. Tell me, what did you lose? Catalina turned to the window, the city glittering below like millions of stars fallen to the ground. She hadn't told this story to anyone in 5 years. She'd buried it so deep that sometimes she almost forgot it had ever been real. But tonight, in this lavish penthouse, across from a man who'd just exposed the deepest wound of his own, she felt the walls she'd built beginning to crumble. I had a husband. His name was Diego. He was the best man I've ever known. Her voice was light as breath, but every word landed like stone. A gang wanted him to join. He said no. They shot him in front of me. She heard Roman inhale sharply, but she didn't look at him. She couldn't. I was 7 months pregnant, she continued, her voice starting to shake. The shock. I lost the baby that night. A boy. I was going to name him Mateo. She turned back to Roman, and for the first time she didn't try to hide the pain in her eyes. I lost my husband and my son in the same night. A heavy silence settled over the room. Roman looked at her, and she saw something change in his gaze. He wasn't looking at her like a cleaning woman anymore. Not like a savior, either. He was looking at her like someone like himself. Someone life had knocked down, and yet she stood up. That's why you saved them. His voice went rough. Because you couldn't save your own child. Catalina nodded, tears rising but held back. If I can stop one mother from feeling what I felt, even just one, then it's all worth it. They sat in silence, two strangers with matching wounds, watching the glittering city below, and they didn't need to say anything else. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. 3 weeks later, Catalina's life began to shift in small but significant ways. The charges had been dropped exactly as Roman had promised. Her visa had been extended permanently. The paperwork for her grandmother was being processed, and according to Roman, she would be in the United States within a month. For the first time in 5 years, Catalina allowed herself to hope. That afternoon, she was buying groceries at a small market near her new apartment, the one Roman had rented for her without asking. She was choosing fruit, holding a red apple in her hand, her mind turning over what her grandmother might like when she arrived. She didn't notice the man approaching until he was beside her, far too close to be accidental. He said her name, Catalina Reyes, and the thick El Salvador accent froze her blood solid. Then he added, La partera del pueblo, the village midwife. Catalina turned, and the world seemed to collapse under her feet. Marco Salazar. She recognized him instantly even after 5 years. The sharp, angled face with a long scar running from his temple down to his cheekbone. The eyes cold as a snake's, the smile that never reached his gaze. He was one of the men who'd stood watching when Diego was shot. He was one of the men who'd laughed when her husband went down in a pool of blood. Catalina's heart kicked into chaos, her hand shaking so hard the apple slipped from her fingers, hit the floor, and rolled away in a deadly quiet. Marco gave a contemptuous little laugh, his voice low but clear enough that every word landed. He asked if she thought she could disappear, and said they had eyes everywhere. Catalina couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She stood there, rigid as a statue, while the nightmare she'd believed she'd left behind in El Salvador suddenly stood inches from her. Marco went on, saying her husband had owed them. He'd paid with his life, but the debt wasn't erased. He picked up an apple and turned it in his palm as if he were playing, then looked at her with eyes sharp as knives and said she knew things about them. Things she'd seen, things she'd heard, and they couldn't allow loose ends to exist. Catalina found her voice again, though it trembled in a way that felt pathetic even to her. She said she didn't know anything. She hadn't told anyone anything. Marco nodded with a sympathy that was clearly fake, and said he knew she hadn't spoken, but she could speak, and that was the problem. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell cheap cigarettes on him, and told her she had a week to come back to them, willingly, or they would bring her back. Then he paused, his smile spreading wider, and added her grandmother too. It felt like a fist drove straight into Catalina's chest. He said they knew where the old woman lived, old, alone, a weak heart, and Catalina's teeth ground together as her hand curled into a fist even though she knew she didn't stand a chance against the man in front of her. She warned them not to touch her. And Marco laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He repeated that she had a week, partera, then set the apple back on the shelf and patted her shoulder as if they were old friends, before turning and walking away. He disappeared through the door and melted into the street crowd as if he'd never been there at all. Catalina stood under the bright grocery store lights among ordinary shoppers who had no idea her world had just fallen apart for the second time. She couldn't remember how she got home. She only knew that when she came back to herself, she was sitting on the bed in the new apartment, the door locked tight, the curtains drawn, darkness pressing down on everything. Her hands were still shaking. Her whole body was still shaking. 5 years. 5 years of running, rebuilding her life from nothing, trying to forget the nightmare. And now it had found her. Run, she thought. And the thought turned sour immediately. Because run where? She'd run once. She didn't have the strength to run again. Call the police. They couldn't protect her from MS-13. Nobody could. Those men had eyes everywhere, reach that stretched far, and a hatred that never cooled. Catalina looked at the phone on the table. Roman's number was in her contacts, the number he'd given her after that night in the penthouse. She didn't want to drag him into this. He'd already done enough for her. He didn't owe her anything else. But she had no one. No one at all. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. The line rang once, then twice, and then his voice came through, deep and steady as always, saying her name, Catalina. She told him she needed help. 30 minutes later, Roman was standing in her apartment with 4 men in black suits behind him. Catalina told him everything. About Marco, about the threat, about her childhood in El Salvador when she'd accidentally witnessed things she never should have seen, about the real reason Diego had been killed. Roman sat silent the entire time she spoke, his face unreadable, like stone. When she finished, the room sank into a heavy silence. Then he spoke, and his voice was so cold the air seemed to turn to ice. He said they would never touch her or her grandmother. He rose, tall and terrifying in the darkness, and said this was his city, and no one was allowed to threaten what belonged to him. Catalina stared at him, the words echoing in her mind. What belonged to me? And she didn't know what she felt about that. Protected, possessed, or both. Roman told her she would stay at his house until this was resolved, his tone leaving no room for argument. Catalina started to protest, saying she couldn't, and Roman cut her off, telling her it wasn't a request. She looked at him, ready to push back, and then she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Worry. Real worry. Not for a debt, not for an obligation. For her, and she heard herself answer, quietly, "All right." 5 weeks passed like a dream. The threat from MS-13 was handled. Roman didn't say how, and Catalina didn't ask. She only knew that one morning, he looked at her and said, "It's done. You're safe." And she believed him. Marco Salazar didn't appear again. There were no more suspicious shadows trailing her, no more strange calls or threatening messages. The nightmare was gone, and Catalina didn't want to know how it had disappeared. Some questions were better left unasked. Her life began to change in ways she'd never imagined. Dr. Wells, the only woman in that delivery room who'd chosen to watch instead of judge, reached out to her. She offered Catalina a job at the hospital as a birth consultant, a title created specifically for her, blending traditional midwifery knowledge with modern medicine. And today was the first day. Catalina stood in front of the mirror in the staff changing room, staring at her reflection as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. A white coat, a name badge that read, Catalina Reyes, birth consultant. Not a pale blue janitor uniform, not a cleaning cart, not the invisibility she'd worn for 5 years like a second skin. It felt strange. When she stepped into the hallway, a few nurses smiled and greeted her. A young doctor nodded with respect as he passed. They knew the story. The rumor had spread through the hospital about the cleaning woman who'd saved the Castellanos when 15 doctors couldn't. Catalina wasn't invisible anymore, and she didn't know if she liked that. But not everyone welcomed her. Catalina was standing at the nurse's station, reviewing patient files, Doctor. Wells had handed her, when a familiar voice sounded behind her. "So, now we're taking medical advice from a janitor. Dr. Morrison, the man with the Yale degree who'd reported her, who'd tried to ruin her life because she'd embarrassed him." He stood there with his arms crossed, looking at her with undisguised contempt. A few doctors and nurses nearby stopped, tense. "What's next?" he went on, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Valet parking performing surgery?" Catalina didn't answer. She was used to insults. 5 years of scrubbing floors had given her a lifetime's worth. She lowered her gaze and kept reading the file as if he didn't exist. "But Dr. Morrison wasn't finished. Who do you think you are? Do you think one lucky moment makes you a doctor? You're just a... Is there a problem here, doctor?" A low voice, cold as cut ice, sliced through his words. Roman Castellano stood at the end of the hall, just stepping out of Gianna's room. He'd come to visit his sister and his nephew, and he'd walked into the scene at the exact moment the humiliation was unfolding. Dr. Morrison turned, and his face went pale when he realized who was looking at him. The most powerful mafia boss in New York was standing there, his gaze so cold it felt like it could freeze the air. No problem, Mr. Castellano. Good." Roman walked closer, each step measured on the stone floor. Because Miss Reyes saved my sister's life, and anyone who disrespects her is disrespecting me. He stopped directly in front of Dr. Morrison, taller by nearly a head. I trust you understand that. Dr. Morrison swallowed, nodded quickly, and slipped away like a mouse that had spotted a cat. The people around them scattered fast, no one wanting to stand too close to danger. Roman watched him go, then turned back to Catalina, his expression softening. But she didn't feel grateful. She felt angry. Catalina waited until they reached a quieter stretch of hallway, then faced him. You didn't need to do that. He was insulting you. I can handle it. I've handled much worse. You shouldn't have to handle it, Roman replied, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. That's not your decision, Catalina said, her voice colder than she'd meant it to be. I don't need you fighting for me. I've survived this long without a protector. And look where that got you, Roman shot back, his gaze sharpening. Alone. Afraid. Nearly deported. The words landed like a slap. Catalina lifted her chin, her eyes burning. I'd rather be alone than be owned. Roman looked like someone had hit him in the chest. He stared at her, and she caught something flicker in his eyes. Hurt. Is that what you think? You think I'm trying to own you? I don't know what you're trying to do, Catalina said, her voice trembling slightly. And that's the problem. A tight silence wrapped the hallway. Roman held her gaze for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer, almost a whisper. I'm trying to protect you, because I care. Is that really so hard to believe? Yes, Catalina said without hesitation. It's very hard to believe, because nobody cares without wanting something back. Roman looked at her, and she saw real pain in his eyes. Then maybe you've been around the wrong people. He turned and walked away without looking back. Catalina stood alone in the hallway, watching his broad back until it disappeared around the corner. She knew she'd gone too far. She knew she'd hurt him, but she didn't know how to trust anyone anymore. 5 years of loneliness had taught her that every kindness came with a price, and she was afraid of finding out what price Roman wanted her to pay. 2 weeks passed in a heavy silence. Roman didn't reach out. Catalina didn't call. They moved like strangers again, as if what had happened between them had only been a dream. Catalina kept working at the hospital, kept learning how to live inside this new life, but there was a strange hollow place in her chest that she didn't want to admit was there. She missed him. She missed the late-night conversations in the penthouse. She missed the way he listened to her as if every word she spoke mattered, and she hated herself for it. Gianna came to find her one afternoon, just as Catalina finished her shift. She pushed a stroller with baby Matteo sleeping inside, a smile on her lips but seriousness in her eyes. My brother's an idiot, Gianna said plainly, without any softening, but his intentions are good. Catalina didn't know what to say. She only stood there, looking at the woman whose life she'd saved 7 weeks earlier. He asked me to give you this. Gianna handed her a slip of paper. An address in Brooklyn, and a time. This afternoon. Catalina went there without knowing what she was expecting. In front of her was an old 3-story building, the red brick faded with time, scaffolding wrapped around it, workers moving in and out, the sound of drills and hammers filling the air. The building was being renovated. Roman stood at the entrance, alone. No suit, only a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked different, less frightening, more real. When he saw her, he didn't smile, but his eyes brightened. You came. Gianna said you wanted to show me something. Roman nodded and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Come with me. Inside, the building was larger than Catalina expected. Afternoon light poured through large windows and spilled across wooden floors being polished back to life. The walls had been painted white, new plumbing and electrical lines installed, the air carrying the faint scent of fresh paint and new-cut wood. Roman led her through room after room, and finally stopped in a wide space with high ceilings and windows that looked out onto a small garden in the back. This will be the Esperanza Birth Center. Catalina went still. Sure, she'd misheard. What did you say? A clinic for women who can't afford hospital bills? Roman explained, his voice even but softer than usual. A place where traditional midwifery knowledge and modern medicine can exist together. A place where women like you can do what you were born to do. Catalina stared at him, then around the room, then back at him. You're serious? I don't joke about things that matter, he said, his eyes never leaving her. I named it after your grandmother, Esperanza. I hope you don't mind. And it happened. Tears rose before Catalina could stop them. She lifted a hand to cover her mouth, her shoulders shaking. unable to control the wave of feeling that swallowed her whole. Roman stood there, a flash of alarm crossing his face. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have decided on my own. If you don't want it, no." Catalina shook her head, tears still falling, but she was smiling. "These are happy tears." They walked through the building again, and Roman explained the plan detail by detail. A delivery room with modern equipment, but a warmth that still felt like home. A training room where Catalina could pass 7 generations of knowledge on to young midwives. A free clinic for immigrant women without insurance. Catalina started to offer suggestions, animated in a way she hadn't felt in years. This room could be for postpartum care. And here, if we add one more window, the natural light would be better for the mothers. Roman listened, nodding, taking in every word as if it were the most important thing in the world. Finally, they went up to the rooftop. Brooklyn spread out below. Old rooftops stitched between new towers, the sunset turning the sky to gold. Catalina stood by the railing, evening wind lifting her hair. "I'm sorry," she said, not looking at him, "for what I said. About being owned." "You weren't wrong," Roman said, standing beside her, also looking out at the city. "In my world, protection usually comes with conditions." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "But with you." He stopped again, almost careful. "There are no conditions. I don't want anything from you." Catalina turned to look at him. "Then why? Why are you doing all of this?" Roman turned too, his gaze meeting hers, and in that moment she saw him without armor. "Because you make me want to be something different than what I am." His voice was light as breath. "To everyone else, I'm Roman Castellano, a name people fear. With you, I'm just Roman, and I haven't been allowed to be just Roman since I was 8. Catalina didn't know what to say. There weren't words big enough. She only knew her heart was beating faster than it should, that something was shifting between them, something she didn't dare name. She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the railing. Not a grip, just a light touch. A small connection between two people used to living alone. Roman looked down, at her hand on his. He didn't pull away, and they stood there, 2 silhouettes against a sunset sky, letting themselves, for the first time, touch the hope of something more than loneliness. 2 months later, Catalina stood in the arrivals hall at JFK, her heart pounding so hard she thought the whole world could hear it. Around her, people flowed past. The steady voice of airport announcements echoed overhead. Suitcase wheels rattled across the floor, and families reunited in laughter and tears. But she didn't hear any of it. She stared at the glass doors, waiting for a small figure she'd missed for 5 years. Roman stood behind her at a respectful distance. He knew this was her moment, not his. He simply stayed there in silence, like a guard in the shadows. The doors opened and the stream of travelers poured in. Catalina rose onto her toes, trying to see over heads, her heart threatening to leap out of her chest. And then she saw her. Grandmother Esperanza, smaller than Catalina remembered. Older, hair white as clouds, back more bent, steps slower. 5 years of distance had taken many things from her. But her eyes were still bright as ever, still sharp, still full of love. "Abuela," Catalina cried, not caring who stared, not caring where she was. She ran to her, pushing through the crowd, tears spilling before she even realized they were coming. Her grandmother lifted her head, and when she saw Catalina, her wrinkled lips began to tremble. "Mija." They embraced in the middle of the crowded airport. Catalina held her grandmother tight as if she might disappear the moment Catalina loosened her arms. Her grandmother held her back, small hands rubbing her spine the way she used to when Catalina was a child waking from nightmares. 5 years fell apart in tears. 5 years of loneliness. 5 years of longing. 5 years of not daring to go home because she feared she wouldn't be allowed to return. None of it mattered anymore. "Abuela, abuela, I've missed you so much. Mija, my beautiful Mija." Her grandmother's voice shook, tears rolling down her creased cheeks. "You're safe. You're alive. I'm here now." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, crying, saying nothing else because nothing else was needed. There were moments when words became unnecessary, and this was one of them. When they finally pulled apart, her grandmother lifted a hand to wipe Catalina's tears, a gentle smile on her lips. But then her gaze slid past Catalina's shoulder, and the smile vanished, replaced by sharp curiosity. "Who is that man watching you?" Catalina turned and saw Roman still standing where he'd been, observing them. That's Roman Castellano. He's the one who brought you here. Her grandmother studied Roman for a long moment, reading him the way she might read a book. Her eyes missed nothing. From the expensive suit to the polished leather shoes. From the way he held his posture to the way he looked at her granddaughter. Bring him here. I want to meet him. Catalina hesitated, but she knew no one could refuse her grandmother. She turned back and gave Roman a small nod. He walked over, and for the first time since she'd known him, Catalina saw him look uneasy. Roman Castellano, the man who made all of New York afraid, was tense in front of a 72-year-old woman who barely reached 5 feet. Her grandmother took his hand, pulled him closer, and looked straight into his eyes. She spoke in Spanish, slow and clear. You have kind eyes, but dangerous hands. I don't speak, Roman started. Her grandmother switched to English, her accent thick but every word sharp. I said, you have kind eyes, but dangerous hands. She squeezed his hand lightly. I know men like you. My village has them too. Some protect, some destroy. Which kind are you? Roman looked at her, and Catalina saw he didn't dodge the gaze the way he usually did with other people. With your granddaughter, I protect. Why? A simple question, but heavy as a mountain. Roman was quiet for a moment, as if weighing each word. Because she saved someone I love, and because... He glanced at Catalina, then back to her grandmother. Because she makes me want to be better than I am. Her grandmother held his gaze for a long time. So long Catalina found herself holding her breath. Then she nodded, slowly. A good answer. But answers are easy. Actions are hard. She let go of his hand. You want my approval? Earn it. With time, with patience, with proof. I will, Roman said without hesitation. Her grandmother smiled for the first time since looking at him. We'll see. On the ride back, in the luxury car Roman had sent, Catalina sat in the back with her grandmother. Roman rode in the front seat beside the driver, giving them private space. What do you think of him? Catalina asked softly. Her grandmother looked out the window. New York sliding past like a dream. I think he's dangerous, and I think he loves you. Catalina nearly choked. Abuela, he doesn't. We don't. Mija. Her grandmother turned, eyes full of the knowing that comes from living almost a century. I've helped 600 babies into the world. I know when something is being born, and something is being born between the two of you, whether you admit it or not. Catalina said nothing. She turned to the window, but in the rearview mirror she caught Roman's eyes looking at her. They both looked away too quickly, like children caught doing something forbidden. And Grandmother Esperanza only smiled, as if she'd known all along. 3 months later, the Esperanza Birth Center officially opened its doors to its first patient. The old building in Brooklyn had been completely transformed, bright and warm, with soft, pale blue walls that rested the eyes and large windows that welcomed natural light. Catalina stood in the main delivery room and looked around the space she had helped design. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing exactly where she belonged. That afternoon, a young woman was brought in, Rosa, 19 years old. Her belly round and full, her face pale with fear. She was undocumented, without insurance, without papers, with no one to lean on. She was in labor, but too frightened to go to a hospital because she was afraid of being arrested, afraid of being deported, afraid of losing her baby before she ever got to see its face. Catalina took Rosa's hand and looked into the girl's panicked eyes. You're safe here. Nobody's going to take you anywhere. But when Catalina began to examine her, she realized the situation was far more serious than a normal birth. Rosa's blood pressure was dangerously high. Her eyes started to glaze, her hands and feet swollen, the unmistakable signs of preeclampsia. This was beyond the clinic's limits. This was a hospital case with full emergency equipment. But if they called an ambulance, Rosa could be arrested. She could be deported. She could lose her baby, lose everything. Catalina stood between two choices, and either one could lead to disaster. Roman arrived at that exact moment. He stepped in to check on the center the way he often did, but stopped when he saw the scene. Catalina was beside the bed, her face tight with strain, her hand trembling faintly on Rosa's abdomen. He could see she was facing the hardest decision of her life. But he didn't interfere. He didn't ask. He only moved back into the corner and stood there, trusting her completely. Catalina took a deep breath and began to act. Call Dr. Wells right now. Tell her we need magnesium sulfate. Now. She turned to the nurse, her voice no longer shaking. Start an IV. Monitor blood pressure continuously. Nobody panics. While they waited for the medication, she used the technique her grandmother had taught her, placing a hand on Rosa's forehead and whispering words in Spanish, keeping the girl anchored and calm. Grandmother Esperanza was there too, standing beside her granddaughter, supporting every step. "That's it, Mija. Just like I taught you." Then the worst happened. Rosa began to seize, her whole body locked, her eyes rolled back, her limbs jerking on the bed. The delivery room erupted into chaos. A nurse screamed. Someone dropped a tray of instruments. Metal clattered against the floor, sharp and jarring. "Everyone, be quiet." Catalina's voice tore through the chaos, cold and commanding. "I need silence." The room froze. Catalina didn't pay attention to them. She focused entirely on Rosa, on the seizure, on time. She counted each second, waiting for the medication to take effect. One hand steadying Rosa's head so she wouldn't injure herself. 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 1 minute. The seizure stopped. Rosa gasped, her eyes slowly returning to normal. Catalina checked her blood pressure again and let out a breath when she saw the number falling. The medication was working. They'd made it through. But the birth still wasn't over. After Rosa stabilized, the labor contractions returned. Catalina went on with her work, calm and professional, as if she'd done this 1,000 times. And maybe she had, in those years in El Salvador, in midnight deliveries in a small village the world had forgotten. A newborn cry rose, clear and strong. "It's a girl, a healthy baby girl." Catalina placed the baby on Rosa's chest, and the young mother broke into tears, clutching her child, soaking the pillow with relief. "Thank you, thank you." Catalina held Rosa's hand and smiled. "You're safe here. Nobody's going to take you anywhere. This is your home now." Roman stood in the corner and watched it all. He watched Catalina give orders, make decisions, save 2 lives. He watched her face a seizure without shaking. He watched her hold the newborn with the gentleness of someone who had lost a child. And he realized she wasn't the frightened cleaning woman he'd met in that delivery room that night. She was someone else entirely. Confident, powerful in her own way, radiant. After the birth, Roman found Catalina in the staff break room. She was washing her face, exhausted but happy, fluorescent light shining on her wet skin. "You were incredible," he said, voice low and sincere. "I only did my job." "No." Roman stepped closer. "You're being who you were born to be." Catalina turned, and suddenly they were standing very close. Close enough that she could catch his cologne, could see every hard line of his face, could feel the warmth of his body. "I've never met anyone like you, Catalina Reyes," Roman whispered, his eyes holding something she didn't dare name. The distance between them narrowed. Catalina's heart raced. She saw him tilt his head down, saw his gaze drop to her mouth. A knock sounded at the door, and both of them startled and stepped back. "Miss Reyes, the baby needs you." The moment burst like a soap bubble. Catalina drew a shaky breath. "I have to go." "I know," Roman said, his voice rougher than usual. "Go." She walked out of the room, but they both knew it. Something had changed, and it couldn't go back to the way it had been. 4 months later, Catalina's phone buzzed at 10 o'clock at night. Roman's name glowed on the screen, and her heart tightened for a reason she didn't want to admit. "I have something important I need to tell you." His voice came through the call, low and serious. "Can you come to the clinic?" Catalina reached the Esperanza Birth Center 20 minutes later, so worried her hands trembled as she opened the door. The clinic was closed, dim lights washing over empty hallways and leaving the air unnaturally still. Roman was waiting for her in the main delivery room, the very room where, a month ago, she'd saved Rosa and her baby. "Is something wrong? Is Gianna okay? Is the baby okay?" Catalina fired the questions, her eyes scanning him for any sign of bad news. "Everyone's fine," Roman said, his tone softer than usual. "This is about us. Us." A simple word, yet it hung in the air like a promise, like a question, like a leap into a void with no guarantee of a bottom. Roman turned his back to her and looked out the window, streetlights outside tracing pale lines across the hard angles of his face. "I've spent my whole life building an empire on fear," he began, voice steady, as if he were reading an indictment of himself. "People do what I say because they're afraid of what'll happen if they don't. But you," he said, turning back, and the look in his eyes was something she hadn't seen before. "You've never been afraid of me. Not once. That first night, you looked me straight in the eye and told me to trust you. No one does that. No one dares. Catalina remembered that night. The night she knocked on the delivery room door and spoke 5 words that should have gotten her killed. I was terrified, she admitted, her voice as light as breath. I just didn't show it. That's even more impressive, Roman said. He stepped closer, and Catalina could see him searching for words, trying to say something he might never have said to anyone. I've been trying to understand what I feel for you. It took me 4 months to understand it. He paused, drawing in a deep breath as if he were bracing for the biggest jump of his life. I don't want to protect you because I owe you. I want to protect you because the thought of anything happening to you would destroy me. I don't want to help you because you're useful. I want to be with you because when I'm beside you, I remember who I used to be, before all of this happened. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a naked truth with no armor left to hide behind. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm only asking you to give me a chance to try. Silence filled the room. Catalina stood there, her heart racing, her mind spinning with 1,000 tangled thoughts. She'd lost too much. She'd hurt too much. She didn't know if she could survive one more loss. Roman, her voice shook. I've been hurt before. I've lost everything. She looked at him, tears beginning to rise. I'm not sure I can live through losing again. I would never. Roman started, but Catalina cut him off. I know you don't mean to, but your world, it's dangerous. I'll keep you away from it. I'll keep you safe. Can you keep yourself safe? She asked, almost a whisper. Can you promise me you'll come home every night? Roman fell silent. She was asking for what he couldn't guarantee. In his world, nothing was certain. No one was untouchable. Not even him. I can't promise that, he said, his voice catching. Catalina nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I know. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. Then Catalina wiped her tears and lifted her head, looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her before. But I can promise you something, she said, steadier now. I can promise I'll be here. No matter what happens, I won't run. She stepped closer. Because you're right. When I'm with you, I remember who I used to be too, before I made myself invisible, before I forgot I deserved to be seen. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel his breath. You see me, Roman. You really see me. And that's worth the risk. Roman raised his hand and rested it gently on her cheek. His hand was warm, trembling slightly. Nothing like the cold hand of the mafia boss she'd once known. I'll do everything I can to deserve you, he whispered. I know, Catalina said. And then they kissed, softly, slowly, like two people who'd been waiting a long time for this moment, afraid of it, aching for it, and finally brave enough to reach for it. They stood in the empty room of the clinic, the place where Catalina had saved so many lives, the place where she'd found herself again, the place where she was now allowing herself to be saved. When they parted, Roman looked at her, his eyes full of love. So what now? Catalina smiled, the first truly happy smile she'd worn in so many years. Now, we build something, together. 6 months later, the Esperanza Birth Center officially celebrated its grand opening. The old building in Brooklyn now glowed under the spring sun, blue and white ribbons everywhere, fresh flowers set in every corner. A large crowd gathered at the main entrance, doctors, nurses, reporters, and community members who'd heard about this place. It was a beautiful day to begin a new chapter. Gianna stood in the front row with Michael, holding baby Matteo, the 1-year-old tugging at his mother's blouse. The name Matteo had been Catalina's suggestion, chosen in honor of Matteo, the son she'd lost. Gianna had cried when she heard the reason, and she'd insisted on saying yes. Grandmother Esperanza sat in the seat of honor, her silver hair neatly brushed, her eyes shining with pride as she watched her granddaughter at the podium. She'd lived 72 years, had helped 600 babies into the world, but no moment had ever made her happier than this one. Dr. Wells spoke first on behalf of the hospital, praising the union of modern medicine and traditional knowledge. Rosa, the young woman Catalina had saved 3 months earlier, stood in the crowd with her little daughter in her arms, tears sliding down her cheeks as she watched the woman who'd given her and her child a second chance. Then it was Catalina's turn. She stepped up to the microphone, looked down at the crowd, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. 6 months ago, I was a cleaning woman mopping floors in silence, she began, her voice trembling slightly but steady. I thought my gift died with my son. I thought my fate was to be invisible forever. But one person saw me, when nobody else did. She turned and looked at Roman, the man standing at the back of the crowd, his gaze never leaving her for even a second. He gave me back my purpose. He gave me back my grandmother. He gave me back myself. This center is named after my grandmother, Esperanza. In Spanish, it means hope. She drew a breath, tears rising. That's what we bring here. Hope. For mothers who have run out of hope. For babies who need a chance. No one will be turned away. No one will be forgotten. No one will be invisible. In Catalina's mind, a memory flashed. That night, her mop in hand, standing outside the delivery room door, her heart pounding with fear but unable to turn away. Her grandmother's voice echoed inside her. When you know how to help, staying silent is harm. She hadn't stayed silent. She'd knocked. She'd spoken 5 words that should have cost her life. And her life had changed forever. Catalina and her grandmother held the scissors together and cut the red ribbon. Applause thundered, mixing with cheers and the tears of people who'd witnessed her journey from the beginning. Roman stood behind the crowd, not clapping, only watching her with a pride she could feel even from dozens of steps away. After the ceremony, her grandmother pulled Catalina aside and took her granddaughter's hand. I told you, Mija, the knowing lives in your fingers. She smiled, her old eyes still bright as stars. But now you have more than that. You have someone who believes in you. She glanced toward Roman, who was speaking with Dr. Wells, though his eyes still drifted back to Catalina now and then. He passed my test. With time, with patience, with proof. She squeezed Catalina's hand. You can trust him. The clinic opened immediately after the ceremony, and the first patient was already waiting. A young mother, maybe only in her 20s, her belly round and full, the worried eyes of a first-time pregnancy. Catalina guided her into the exam room, speaking gently to ease her tension. I'm going to place my hands on your belly now. I won't hurt you. The young woman nodded, and Catalina laid her skilled, hard-working hands on the pregnant belly. In that moment, the knowing awakened. The familiar sensation rushed back. Information traveling through skin, through muscle, through bone. She felt the baby, head down, perfect position, a strong, steady heartbeat. The circle closed. Your baby is perfect, Catalina said with a smile. Head is down, ready to meet you. The young woman burst into tears of relief, and Catalina held her hand the way her grandmother had held hers for so many years. Roman stood in the doorway, watching Catalina work. He was no longer a mafia boss watching prey. He was simply a man watching the woman he loved shine. Catalina lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes across the room. She smiled, a truly happy smile, the kind she'd thought she'd forgotten the night she lost her husband and child 5 years ago. He smiled back, gave a small nod, then quietly turned away so she could keep working. Some people are born to be seen. Some people are born to see what others miss. Catalina Reyes had lived 5 years in the dark before she understood. Invisibility had never been her destiny. It had only been a temporary hiding place, until she was brave enough to step into the light. And when she did, she found something unexpected waiting. Not only purpose, not only salvation, but love. The kind of love that sees her, truly sees her, and stays even knowing everything. The end. Catalina and Roman's story has closed, but its message still echoes. This is a story about courage, about daring to step out of the shadows, even when you're afraid, about daring to use your gift even when the world doesn't recognize it, about daring to love even after you've been hurt. The biggest lesson from this story is, don't ever let fear make you invisible. You have value, you have your own gift, and there's always someone out there willing to see you, if you dare to give them the chance. If you felt moved by this story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the most compelling videos every day. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with your friends and loved ones, the ones who might need to hear this story today. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever felt invisible in your life? Has anyone ever seen you when nobody else did? Share your feelings in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the thoughts from the deepest part of your heart. Thank you for staying with us through this long story. Wishing you and your family good health, a joyful life, and days that are peaceful and full of hope, just like the name Esperanza in the story. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.